Sir James Frazer shows in his The Golden Bough that there was a period of magic before science and religion. He considers science to have somehow evolved out of this magic. That somehow, numbers can be derived from magic and mythology. I argue that cannot be the case. And, as explained above, it's better to understand art and mythology from what it is not, mathematics, than to somehow derive numbers from mythology. Historically, numbers were the first mathematics. Numbers were understood concretely. I'm going to start with numbers first. The number 5 turns out to the point where most humans lose count. To explain that shows something of the problems early humans had when learning numbers. Generally, when you put down 5 or more objects, you can't tell how many without counting. For objects less than 5, you can tell how many without counting. Knowing how many people are in a theater drives this home. If you have a theater of people, but haven't counted beforehand how many seats are in the theater, then about all you can say is you have a theater of people. And, this is how early people understood numbers. They had concrete words for 1, 2, and many. Then, they graduated to 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, 12, 60. Their problem was not being able to transform from one number to another. They couldn't notice the equivalence of 3 plus 4, and 6 plus 1. The Nebra sky disk is the latest and greatest example of this. The Nebra sky disk has a boat, the Sun, Moon, the Pleiades, and 2 gold leaves on the sides. They seem to be equivalent to the angles between the solstices. The Nebra sky disk dates to like 1600 BC. There was a recent redating. This is a bronze disk, not an iron disk. So, I don't know how they can date this to the Iron Age. The dating doesn't really change conclusions on my mathematical points about the 2 gold leaves on the sides marking the solstices. They did not calculate the angle like counting the number of the angles, or solving an algebraic equation. They just transferred the angle from a Stonehenge-like circle to the disk. Kind of like in geometry, where you use your compass, and transfer a length from one line, or angle, to another. The people who put those 2 gold leaves on had a theater understanding of numbers. And Stonehenge leads to the arch as the symbol of mathematics. Archaeologists have found lots of Stonehenges. This one is in contemporary Israel. It's called Rujum el-Hiri and dates to 3000 BC. The Old Testament mentions Gilgals, which means circle of 12 stones. Circular stones certainly seem like some form of Stonehenge. 12 is a number that will come up a lot in this Gospel of Truth. All the stone circles are always rough and jagged surfaces. They just took some stone and flopped it there. They sometimes put such a stone on top of 2 such jagged surfaces. But Stonehenge appears to have straight surface, smooth lintel, ceilings. So, the significance of Stonehenge over hundreds, if not thousands of other stone circles built at that time, could be that the Stonehenge builders had a rudimentary understanding of how to make a smooth surface. Note, the post columns of Stonehenge are still potato-shaped. But the tops of the posts are shaped enough to form fit with the stones covering the column stones. So how to make a smooth, flat surface? As we'll see below, it takes mathematical insight. One way to make a smooth surface is to take a string and attach a ball at the end, and then move the perpendicular line, string across the surface. Anytime the ball hits a bump, then carve that bump out. This is the beginning of a famous mathematical theorem about isosceles triangles. The isosceles theorem is that of the 2 base angles being equal. How to prove it? First you have to construct an isosceles triangle, and that takes some proving as well, but let's assume the isosceles triangle is constructed. First you need to draw a straight line from the top, perpendicular to the base of the 2 equal angles below. Remember the line with a ball hanging down to get a smooth surface below? First we know the sides split between the perpendicular line and the 2 angles make equal line segments, and then we know the 2 hypotenuse sides are equal, and so we know 2 triangles generated by splitting the original triangle by the perpendicular line are congruent. Therefore, the 2 angles of those 2 congruent triangles must be equal. Whatever the case may be, on whether the makers of Stonehenge had some kind of mathematical knowledge to make smooth surfaces, most Stonehenges did not. And, these stone circles were not much above the bees and ants making their hives. I'm showing that mankind's natural language and mathematical science took reasoning beyond animal logic, language, and flat earth perspective. And, the arch is the first technological development that proves mankind is beyond the animals. So, I want to explain the arch. The above picture is of a Roman aqueduct in France, below is the biggest post-lintel architecture in human history, the great hypostyle hall making big things with ever larger sidewalls and a stone block on top gets heavier and heavier. So, hauling heavier stones gets harder and harder, but also, the lintel ceiling has a higher chance of splitting and falling down. The stress points in the middle of the ceiling become so great that it breaks. To prevent that with post-column and lintel ceiling, one crowds the columns. Just observe the famous hundreds of rows of columns at Egypt's Karnak. How can one support a ceiling above without carrying all that weight? Both the post columns and top lintel ceiling. One breaks up the columns into more manageable pieces. Then as you stack them up, make the top ceiling part of the columns and meet at a point, the keystone. The Roman aqueduct above is a great example. The arch redraws the stone from a new principle. And it allows the builder to do new things in architecture. All mathematical concepts are like this. The Babylonians used geometry to get at algebra. The Arab mathematicians used the concept of zero and numbers to pattern algebra. The letters are given numerical powers. For instance, a plus a equals 2a. A times a equals a squared. In the calculus, Fermat described what happens instantaneously by a geometric diagram. The algebraic formulation was worked out later. The Stonehenges almost certainly had some relation to early mankind's astronomical knowledge. But they almost certainly used that knowledge more for spiritual reasons. Mathematics, mythology, existed at the same time. One didn't derive from the other, as Sir James Frazer suggested in his The Golden Bough. He thought magic and mythology were a kind of early, primitive science. And that science and mathematics somehow evolved out of magic and mythology. As I've said before, numbers and geometry cannot be derived from magic and mythology. But one can explain and understand what magic and mythology are from what they are not, mathematics. For proof, we have tally sticks that go back tens of thousands of years ago. And, maybe even hundreds of thousands of years ago. This seashell with abstract notches dates to 500,000 years ago. This object dates to 100,000 years ago. In contemporary Israel, Neanderthals made this abstract marking at the Rock of Gibraltar, around 40,000 years ago.